Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on the new features in Design Master Photometrics 1.2. We've made some improvements and adjustments to help make your photometrics more efficient and make the software a little bit easier to use. So we're going to go over those together and just see what new features we've added in 1.2. First feature I want to highlight, I've got a photometrics plan pulled up here. Is that you can now create your boundaries using existing polylines from AutoCAD. So here I've got this boundary. It's just a standard polyline in AutoCAD, and we can convert that into a calculation area without having to redraw it. So when we run our command to create a calculation area, I can click OK. It's going to prompt me for the points like normal, or you can press enter at this point, and it's going to prompt you to select a polyline. I select that, it's going to convert it to our calculation area. It's also going to prompt you if you want to erase that polyline so we can get rid of it so it's not sitting there, or you can leave it, whatever you want to do with it. I'm going to erase it so it's not doubled up. Click OK, and that converts it to a calculation area in the software so that we know that you want to do your calculations using that boundary. So that's a new feature. It also works when creating solids, so you can select the area using a polyline to create your solids as well. I'm going to take a look at that boundary I just created. We have a couple new options when you query. First of all, we can tick this box to recalculate the illuminance levels. So if you make a change to your calculation area, we will redo the calculation automatically for you, which is convenient when you're making adjustments. So if I tick that and if I make a change and click OK, it'll redo the calculation for us. We also have the ability to do vertical calculations now, so we can check this box. So now we can calculate the vertical illuminance levels at the boundary. So this will calculate the light that's spilling off of your boundary area in the vertical plane. So if you need to have that for light pollution purposes, you can actually calculate that value. There are three distances that we ask for. One is the calculation spacing. That's how far apart to run all the foot candle or luminance value calculations. The second is the display spacing. If you need that to be different, just to spread the numbers out, you can have it display at a farther distance than the calculations are actually happening. So here we're calculating every 2 feet, but we're spacing it out 5 feet just so that it looks nice on the drawing. And then the ending calculation elevation will go from the ground up to that elevation. So we'll do calculations up to 8 feet in this case. Click OK, and we've got this box checked again. So it will redo that calculation automatically for us. And we can zoom in. And in most cases, we're getting zeros because there's actually no light fixtures over here. You can see it's listing the elevations that we're doing the calculation at as well. If I go over here to where I've got a light fixture, you can at least see that we've got some values being calculated. And those are actually a little bit close together. So that's where the display spacing comes into play. We've got it currently at 5 feet. Let's bump that up to 8 feet. And that'll spread everything out a little bit there. Now you can actually read those numbers and they're separated. So now we can actually see those values. So those are the foot candle values in the vertical plane. If we take a light and adjust it, say we take this light and we rotate this here. If we run the calculation again, we're going to get a lot of light now spilling out. So you can see that we've got 10-foot candles on this vertical boundary right next to the light. So that is the new vertical calculation option that we have. For our light fixtures, previously we had a single IES file associated with them. So if you wanted to have multiple heads on a light fixture, you had to insert multiple lights, and it wasn't the cleanest workflow. We now can actually have multiple heads on a light fixture. So I can take this light fixture here, which currently has a single head, and let's make a two-headed light fixture. So I'll make a copy of this. We'll call this S2. I'm going to change my block. So currently we have a single pole mounted. We have a dual pole mounted, 180 offset, 90-degree offset, 3 heads, and 4 heads. We actually load up these new blocks in your customization. Generally, we don't touch your customization when you do an update, and that continues to be true. In this case, we're very carefully adding a couple new options in there. So we take what you have and we add to it. We're not overriding what's there at all. So we just add a couple new options. You can ignore them. You can erase them if you don't want to have them in there. But this way, if you're using our standard customization, these new blocks are loaded up automatically. I think we had the single in the, we might have had a single and a dual. Actually, I don't think we had any of these in the Photometrics. So we added all these options. We're going to do the 180-degree offset. So this fixture is now going to use this block. And then we need to indicate to the software that we have multiple heads on the light fixture. So I'm going to change this number of heads option here to 2 with a 180-degree offset to match. We will save that, and we will assign that to this light fixture. So now we have 2 heads. And when we run the calculation, you'll see that we're going to get light over here as well. Previously, you had to do that with 2 light fixtures. Now we're doing that with a single light fixture with multiple heads. Just to demonstrate that again, I'm going to come over here and we're going to make this into a 3-headed light fixture. And I will choose my 3-headed fixture and we'll say 3 heads. We also, if you know, we've got the orientation of the 3 heads, they're all at 90 degrees. It might be offset from how your block is defined. So we have the IES rotation that can account for that. So we'll take this S3. I believe this is going to work because we have all of our stuff set up. So we'll run the calculation. Yeah, clearly we've got one going out this way, and then one going this way. But if your block didn't match that, you can use the IES rotation to account for it. So if we rotate this 90 degrees, it's going to shift all 3 of those 90 degrees. And so if we run the calculation, we've got essentially a head coming off this way, and then one to the right, and then one down the page. It doesn't match that block, but if your block and how we have things defined are not matching, that's how you can just adjust it in the software without having to go and change your block definition. We added a new feature to be able to show elevations for your light fixtures. So in the light fixture notes, there's now the elevation command to insert the elevation label. You select the light fixture, and we will insert this little tag, which has the elevation included. If you pull it far enough away, you get the leader. If you right-click, the leader will go away. So if you need to document on your drawing the elevations of your light fixtures, you can put this note in there. That'll give you the elevation. And it's linked to the light fixture. So if we change this and we adjust this, put this up at 25 feet, that label is going to change as well. So that way, yeah, you've got your elevations being labeled in a way that's going to be updated automatically. So you don't have to put those tags in manually and then update them anymore. Now it's all an automatic process. We added a bunch of new units to support metric calculations. So if you do have any projects that are in metric, we can do the calculations in metric now. That shows up in a couple different places. When we actually run the calculation, we have a prompt here. The first is the distance unit. This is the base unit of your drawing. When you measure 1 unit, what do you think that is? Is that a foot? Is that an inch? Previously, those were our options. Now you can say that's a millimeter, a centimeter, or a meter. So if you change the distance unit, that's for the scaling of your drawing. And you just need to make sure that that matches. But if you have a drawing that's in metric, we can now do that without having to rescale your background. We'll change that to centimeter. It's not going to be right because everything's going to be off at this point, but at least we'll calculate. And then we can also specify our illuminance unit. So previously we had everything in foot candles. Now you can do your outputs in lux if you would prefer. So that's just a conversion factor for the values that we output. Click OK, and it'll adjust my calculation. We're at centimeters at this point, so everything's all scaled wrong. So we're actually going to change that back. We'll put this back at foot, so everything calculates right still, but we'll leave it at lux. And you'll see that previously we were kind of in the 10s range, and now we're in the 40 range. So just the lux to foot candle is just a scale factor. But this way you have it in lux if you need it. And then that will also update what is displayed in your schedule. So these are now all lux values. It doesn't change the labels in the schedule because these are actually defined by you. So if you do need to adjust these column labels and the row labels, you do that by modifying your, in your boundary areas, you can modify your column labels. And we would actually need to change these to, instead of saying foot candles, to say lux. So right now we say average foot candles. We would need to change that to say average lux, and then go down and make all those changes. And then it's going to be labeled properly. So that's one place where you do need to manually adjust that if you're changing your foot candle, your luminance output from foot candles to lux. So that's all for the calculation units. We also have a new option. So if you go to options, where you can say the project is metric and set that from no to yes, and that way you can actually have a metric project, and then the inputs are no longer going to be in feet and inches, but actually in meters. So if I change this to yes, all of our heights and lengths are now going to be in meters. So if I click OK, and for example, if I query a fixture, this mounting height is now in meters. So it took the height and feet and it converted it to meters. So the actual elevation of the fixture didn't change, but now it's displaying this value in meters instead. So if you want to do your heights and everything else in meters, you can do that, change it to metric, and then you're using metric units. You'll also notice that the options have been reformatted. We added some new options. I think mostly just the metric option there, and then the units, the distance and the luminance units. And when we did that, we went ahead and adjusted this screen, this window, to be a little bit more user-friendly. So we just organized these pieces a little bit better. So if you are ever in here, it's a little better organized than it was before. And so the options, just so you know, these are set in a project. You can also set them in as standards. So depending on where you want to have it set, you can have different projects using different units, and then you can set up what your defaults are going to be. And for those defaults, we now have the ability to set your standard database. If you use this manage standards, we're going to ship. We actually ship now multiple standards databases. You should get these. So these will kind of display automatically. But then you can choose one of them as your default. If you don't choose, it's going to choose the first one, which is going to be imperial with a foot as the base unit. But you can say, okay, by default, I want to use metric and have meter as my base unit. And so when I start a new project, it's going to choose that one as the default. You can change it, but that's where it's going to start. So we have all of these options available for you, so that then when you start a project, it's going to select that as the default. But again, you can change it. And that's just swapping out the default, the standards database, which you can then set different options for. When we query this grid, we have the option now to set the grid origin and the grid angle for the luminance levels. Previously, where we put this grid was defined by the software. We just kind of found a place that felt good to us, but you couldn't control that. So if you wanted to move where the grid was, we didn't have an option for that. Now I can specify the grid origin, choose a new location. So I'm going to put a foot candle point there, click OK, and it'll redo the whole calculation with that as the origin. And so everything's going to be spaced off of that. So you have that, the ability to change that. Then you can also adjust your grid angle. So right now it's in the XY grid, but if we wanted to, say we wanted to have it parallel to this piece here, this edge of the boundary, we could select that. Now the new angle, the grid's going to match that angle. So now all of our things are using that as our two angles. So that just gives you a little bit more control over how the foot candle values are going to be laid out in your area. So you can adjust where that grid is and how that grid is rotated if you need to do that. There's a question, does the grid calculate around a curve? I think what you're asking is, can we have this grid account for a curve? And the answer to that is no. We have a single grid. So it's going to be a grid that's going to be laid out at 90 degrees. So if you have a curved area like we do here, you kind of end up with sections here where they just don't quite line up. Now, so you have to choose a single grid, and that's what you're going to do. If you really want to have it around a curve, what you could do is actually multiple calculation areas that have different angles, which would be one way to do that. So if you set up some different areas, you could have the different areas rotated differently. There's a follow-up question about the calculation around the curve. So I need to add multiple vertices to look like a curve. Correct. So if you want to have anything defined as a curve, we don't do curves in our software. So I guess the question is, can you make your boundary look like a curve? The answer to that is no. To do a curve, you approximate it with straight lines. So that's the way to do it. And just as a warning, the more edges you put into the software, the longer everything takes. So don't go crazy with your curves. Have a few edges to it, but don't make it tons, because that can increase your calculation time. So just be aware of that. When you rotate the grid, can you also rotate the foot candle values? No, you can't rotate the foot candle values. We are always going to do it, the foot candles, at 0 in AutoCAD. I realize that civil engineers, sometimes you guys, you twist your drawings around. And Design Master doesn't like that, unfortunately. So what you need to do is, at that point, you still have to twist the whole drawing back to 0. We actually have a knowledge base on how to do that. So if your labels are coming in not at the right orientation, we do have a knowledge base article on how to get that twisting right. Let me see if I can look that up here. And if you're watching a recording of this, there should be a link to that below in the bottom of the page. For everyone watching live, I just put the link there in the chat. Then we've got another question unrelated to new features today. Can you edit the text styles in the calculation table? You can. We have complete customization of pretty much everything from layers to colors to text styles. You just got to know the right spot to find it. If you go to the DM Photo Customization tab, that's where we have all the commands for this. And we have the text styles command. So you run that command. And then here is where you define the text styles that are being used. So you just specify the text style that you want to use. And as long as that exists in the drawing, we will use it. Just as an example, if we change this height, in fact, you can adjust the cell separately from everything else. So say we want to have our cells differently. I'm going to change that to 0.05, which will be half the size. And now when we do our calculation, it will update everything, and it'll update that with the new text size. So there, now it's using 0.05 text rather than 0.1. Is there a way to convert the isometric contour lines into a shaded gradient? No, we do not have a feature for that. So we can't do a shaded gradient throughout the whole thing. We can change the colors of the isometrics of the contours, and that would be the closest that we can get. When you run the calculate, we have the layer or color that's going to be used. So if you wanted to do a gradient that way, that would be the best way that we can do it, but we can't actually shade anything. So if we wanted to, we could red, orange, yellow gradient here, click OK. And now we've got different color contours happening. So that's what we have. And depending on if you need that just for visual purposes, you could use colors. If you're plotting, you could use grayscale settings for that. Thanks for attending this webinar. Hope you found it useful. If you have questions or comments, you can always call us 866-516-9497 or email support@designmaster.biz.